Hi everyone, and welcome back to the series of lives that I'm doing based upon my book Beyond Asanas. And today we're on chapter 9. Today I'm going to be talking about chapter 9, and chapter 9 is Garudasana, also known as the eagle's pose. So we've spoken about like the animal kingdom, and we've spoken about asanas based on sages, and today we're coming to asanas based on the bird kingdom. So Garuda Asana is also eagle pose. And there have been several eagles in Indian mythology, which have been very significant. And although this asana is actually dedicated to Garuda, in this chapter I talk about another eagle also who's played a pivotal role in Indian mythology. So let's begin with the first story that I have. So the first story in chapter 9 is called Saving the Day. And Saving the Day is the story of Garuda. And Garuda was actually the vehicle of Lord Vishnu. And those of you who are familiar with Hindu mythology, you know that every god and goddess, they have their own vehicle that they ride. So like for instance, Ganesh is always pictured on a rat. Similarly, Lord Vishnu, is always on Garuda. Garuda takes him from place to place. And it is said that Garuda was born from this huge giant egg, and he was radiant. It said that he was radiant like he shone with the light of 1,000,000 suns. He was that radiant and that powerful. And he was also the king of birds. Garuda was the king of birds, and his body is part man, part eagle. So in a lot of the iconography, and I'll share the iconography in my stories, you'll see him pictured as a man with wings, the wings of an eagle. So that's Garuda. And the story that I've written about is called Saving the Day. And this story is about how when the churning of the ocean was being done. The churning of the ocean for the nectar of immortality was being done. Everybody wanted a piece of that nectar, including the snakes. Now the snakes, because the nectar of immortality would rise up, the snakes, because they're on the ground, they had no way of getting to the nectar of immortality, and so they had to figure out how to get it. So and the snakes were devious beings, they were not like exactly like the most scrupulous of beings. And so what they did was they decided to, they had this scheme, and they thought that what they would do is kidnap Garuda's mother and then sort of emotionally blackmail him, because he could, fly really high, and he could get a little bit of that, that nectar for them. So they said, okay, let's kidnap Garuda's mother, which they did. And then they told Garuda, well, if you want your mom back, you have to get us at least a few drops of the nectar of immortality. And this got Garuda really, really angry. But of course, he wanted his mother back. He wanted his mom safe. So he agreed. He said, okay, I will fly to the top of the mountain and I will get you the nectar of immortality. But in return, you have to give me my mom back safe and sound. But it wasn't so simple. On the way, as he was flying up the mountain, there were 3 obstacles that Garuda had encountered. The first, and these were life-threatening obstacles. So the snakes hadn't really made it very easy for him. So the first obstacle that he encountered was the ring of fire. And because Garuda was a great big bird, he had like these long, huge wings. He had to fly through this ring of fire to go up to the mountain. And if he were to do that, his wings would get singed. They would get burnt. And then he would fall to the floor and he would get injured. So he thought, so Garuda looked at this ring of fire and he was like, okay, I have to do something about it. So what did he do? He saw a river nearby, and he filled a lot of water in his mouth and his beak, came back to the ring of fire and doused the fire and went on. Now, after this the first obstacle, after he successfully got through this first obstacle, he came across a second obstacle, and this was a little more difficult. So this was a circular door which had these metal rings rotating, and there were these small projections, like these spikes projecting from these metal rings, which were like sort of rotating in different directions. And now Garuda was a huge big bird. If he were to fly through these metal rings, he would he would get scarred and he would bleed to death. So again, Garuda was like, okay, what should I do? I need to I can't give up the challenge right now. I have to keep going and to get this thing for the snakes. And so what Garuda did was, because again, he's this magical bird, he has a lot of powers. He made himself very tiny, and then he flew through these metal rings with no injury to him. So the second obstacle that he had was also conquered. Now the last one was that there were these two poisonous snakes, who were guarding his way, who were blocking his way. And Garuda was like, okay, now what do I do? These are big snakes and poisonous, and if they bite me, then I'll die. So what he does is he goes close to the snakes very suddenly. He starts to flap his wings really vigorously, and that scares the snakes. And once they're scared and startled, with his beak, he kills them. And it's said that since that time, since Garuda killed these two poisonous snakes have always been scared of the eagles. And so this was the third obstacle that he had. Went up to the mountain, got the nectar of immortality for the snakes, came down, and was about to give the snakes this nectar when the gods had been observing this whole thing, and they knew that if the snakes got this nectar, then they would misuse it. They would become immortal, and they might misuse it, because the snakes were devious beings. So the moment, as Garuda was about to give them this nectar, the gods intervened and they took away the nectar, but 2 drops still fell into the snake's mouth. And the drops, of this nectar, it was so powerful, so strong, in fact, so poisonous, that it split the tongue of the snakes in 2. And since then, the snakes have always had this forked tongue, is what we believe. So this was the first story, in chapter 9 of my book, and it's about Garuda. Now another bird, another eagle that's very popular in Hindu mythology is Jatayu. Okay, and Jatayu was also a big bird, and so the story, I've titled the story The Great Good Bird, if you can see that. This is from chapter 9 of Beyond Asanas. So in this story, the story is about Jatayu, and it's a very important story in the Ramayana. And in this story, what we see is that Jatayu is this big bird, and he's flying around the forest. The forest is beautiful, all these birds, there's a lot of harmony, all these trees, and he's flying around, and all of a sudden there's a commotion. He hears a scream, a scream pierces the air, and Jatayu is like, he's like, okay, what has happened? He's as startled as the other birds, but while the other birds are running away from the scream, Jatayu wants to see what is the origin of the scream, like where are these screams coming from? And he flies towards the screams, and he sees Sita struggling with Ravana. And Ravan is like, he's kidnapping Sita to take him back to his Lanka. And Jatayu immediately understands what's happened. And without a second thought, he, flies towards Ravan. He intends to peck him painfully so that he can release Sita, and Sita can run towards safety. So what happens is there's a little bit of a fight. Jatayu and Ravan, they, have this fight, but Ravan is actually very, very powerful. And he manages to cut off one of Jatayu's wings, and Jatayu falls to the floor, and he's wounded and he's in pain, and he falls to the floor of the forest, and Ravan takes Sita away. And as Jatayu is lying there, he understands that he's dying. But he also knows that Ram and Lakshman are looking for Sita, and he knows that sooner or later they will arrive and they will find him, and they might even that's what he wants. He wants one last darshan of Ram before he dies, because Jatayu is a great devotee of Ram. And that's exactly what happens. Ram and Lakshman find him, and they're very grateful for what he's done. He's put himself in danger, his own life in danger, to save Sita. And so they express their gratitude. And then Jatayu, and this is I feel that this is the one of the most emotional stories in Hindu mythology. Jatayu asks Ram that, because he's dying already, he wants Ram to kill him so that he can die at the hands of Ram. Like, he can attain mukti, he can attain nirvana through Ram, because he's that big of a devotee. And Ram initially is very taken aback, but he understands that this is something that Jatayu really wants, and he feels like it's his duty to give Jatayu this last wish that he has, especially since he's done so much to save Sita. And so he takes his sword and he ends Jatayu's life. And the kind of cremation, the last rites that they perform are such that are the kind of last rites that you would perform for a member of your own family. That's the kind of regard that Ram and Lakshman had for Jatayu, and for the kind of sacrifice he made to help them. Now we come to the significance and symbolism in this story. And here we can look at how Garuda and Jatayu, although they're both eagles, they represent two different aspects of eagles. So when we do Garudasana, that's what we have to focus on. So for instance, Garuda was someone who was very agile, a bird who was very agile, very focused on his goal, and he stopped at nothing to achieve that goal. So sometimes in life, that's what we have to look at. We have to channel the inner Garuda in us. And sometimes, like Jatayu, Jatayu overcame, he actually fought for what he believed in, and to such an extent that he lost his own life. Now, we're not expecting that everybody loses, it puts their life on the line for what you want. But if you have that kind of devotion, you have to try to give something your 100%. So if you are devoted to the practice of yoga, you have to really get rid of those excuses that are in your mind and practice it 100%, as with anything in life. Now, before we end, I would like to read out the, what I've written as the summary of the significance of this asana. And the first thing that I've written is, when we practice the Garudasana, we need to meditate upon Garuda's bravery, his courage, and his laser-sharp focus. When faced with challenges in life, these are the skills that will see us through. So that's the importance of Garudasana. Now, the second important point that I've written about is, it is important to balance the sharpness and keen sight of the eagle with its aggression. In some situations, we need to act with intellect and foresight, and in others, aggression can help bring about the desired results. So the aggression is actually depicted by Jatayu, and as well as devotion also by Jatayu. And Garuda actually shows us what it means to have this goal in life and stop at nothing, and to use all your resources to attain this goal. So this was chapter 9 from my book, Beyond Asanas. As many of you know, I'm doing this in honor of Yoga Day, which is the day after tomorrow. This book is still available on Amazon. One of my friends recently bought a copy and got it here, and I signed it, so it is still very much available on Amazon. I hope you can access this book, and I hope you read this book. And if you have any questions about what I've discussed today, or anything in the book, or anything about Hindu mythology, do drop me a message, and I will see you tomorrow with the next live. Thank you.